Playoff Team X Factor's Western Conference Edition. The title kind of speaks for itself. To me, an X Factor is the guy on the team that could heavily go one way or the other, and that can determine a playoff series. Not always a star player, sometimes it can be a role player who tends to be inconsistent, and it's really going to weigh in on the result of the series if they have a good series or a bad series. So with that, let's just roll the intro because it's pretty self-explanatory. Before I continue on with this video, about half the people that watch these videos are not subscribed, so if you fall in that 50%, then subscribe. Also drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference. Also, real quick, there is a new episode of the podcast out now that should be out like an hour or so before this video goes up, so go check that out as well. But with that out of the way, let's get on with the topic. For the Utah Jazz, I have Mike Conley. Now, Mike is sometimes the second best player on the Jazz this season, usually third, but sometimes second. The reason he's the X Factor for me is that in his first year in Utah, he was really bad. This year, he's been really good, and there is still a lot of inconsistency with him. So I think if Mike Conley has a really good playoff series, then the Jazz can beat pretty much everybody, because I already expect Rudy Gobert and especially Donovan Mitchell to have good playoff series. I don't think any of the role players should have issues being relatively consistent. It's really going to be Mike Conley, who I think if he has like a 20.7 assist series, that's going to make all the world of a difference for this team. For the Phoenix Suns, I have DeAndre Ayton. Lately, Ayton has been much more of a factor for the Suns, but earlier on in the season, he wasn't doing all too much more than he had been doing earlier in his career. So if Ayton can be the guy who shoots the ball 15 times a game like he has been lately, that is going to make a difference for them as well. If he can also lock in on defense. I watched a bit of the Suns versus Bucks the other day where he was absolutely locking down Giannis. If he can be a fantastic defensive player while also being able to score the ball at a decent rate, it's really going to help Phoenix. For the Clippers, I have Paul George. It is sad that I have to put a guy of Paul George's caliber on a playoff X Factor list, but unfortunately Paul George, ever since calling himself Playoff P, has been a horrible playoff underperformer. And it's absolutely ludicrous to me that people argue that he isn't, when I've seen with my own two eyes how much he underperformed. Stop arguing otherwise. If you're talking about his full career, yeah, I know what he did before he called himself Playoff P, but ever since he said that, it's been disastrous. So Paul George needs to have good playoff series. It can't just be an okay one. He needs to be good, especially against the better teams in the league. He can't be hitting the side of the backboard and going like 6 for 24 or whatever the fuck it was in Game 7 versus Denver, because that shit just won't fly. This team needs him to be good, and he has not been good the last couple of years when his team needs him to be, so do that. For the Nuggets, I'm going to go Will Barton. Will this year has been better for Denver than in years past, but he still is rather inconsistent for this team. His shooting can... I'm not even going to say his shooting. Will Barton can be a completely different player within Denver's system depending on the day. Sometimes he's a shooter, sometimes he's creating off of the dribble, sometimes he's playmaking. He's really inconsistent. He's still consistently pretty good, but how he's being good is inconsistent. If he can consistently be pretty good at something, that'll matter. I don't know if any of that made sense, but if you've watched enough Will Barton, you know what I'm talking about. For the Lakers, I'm pretty sure I picked him last year, and I'm going to continue to do so with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. KCP was really good in last year's playoffs, especially in the finals, and him being a reliable 3-and-D guy is definitely going to be a big deal for Los Angeles. He has had consistency issues in the past. He's actually not been as great this season as he was in the playoffs, and he was relatively bad in the regular season before that, at least in comparison to how he was in the playoffs, so there was concern about how he'd do in the playoffs. He ended up being fine, but it's possible that he is bad in this year's playoffs, so hopefully he's not for Los Angeles. For the Portland Trail Blazers, I'm going to go Jusuf Nurkic. My reason for this is that the Blazers tend to be at their best when Nurkic is at his best, and he has not been at his best this year. He's been dealing with a lot of injuries, and the 22 games that he has played, he has been pretty statistically down in comparison to what he has been the 2 seasons that he was healthy in Portland. So him being healthy and being able to be a guy who can stretch the floor sometimes, be a good playmaking center, and be a solid rim protector, especially with how poor Portland's defense is, that would definitely make a big difference. Hopefully he can get consistent before the playoffs come around and he can have that impact for the playoffs. For the Dallas Mavericks, I have to go Kristaps Porzingis. Yet again, pretty sad that I have to point to the team's second best player to say, hey, this is the X factor for the team, but Porzingis is also a very inconsistent player. His numbers this year have gotten right back up to pretty damn good, but he has a tendency to have games where he puts up like 16 points on 38% shooting, and there's going to be series, especially for the Mavericks that are a lower seed, where they can't really afford him to have games like that. And honestly, I'm going to bet on him having games like that. So hopefully he doesn't, but that's a real possibility. For the Memphis Grizzlies, I'm going to have to go with Dillon Brooks as the pretty obvious pick. Now, I will say I'm kind of surprised Memphis is even in the playoffs to begin with, and I would not be shocked if they ended up falling out. I don't know if I think Jaren's supposed to be back relatively soon. That could help keep them in though. But as for their X factor, I have to go Dillon Brooks because Dillon is maybe the most inconsistent player in the league, because there are games that he has where he just can't stop scoring, and there are games where he can't score, but he's still going to shoot the ball 15 times. And this is very frustrating to Memphis Grizzlies fans because Dillon can have games where he's the hero and he can have the games where he's the fucking villain for the team. So, and I'm not expecting him to be very good for them consistently. And it's also very frustrating when you know that trait about Dillon Brooks and then Dillon has a good game against your team. It's like, why couldn't you be your normal mediocre to bad self? He puts up shots that he really shouldn't take. He should just mostly be a spot-up shooter, but also the team is kind of lacking in shot creation, so he's kind of forced to be that guy sometimes because who else is going to shoot the ball? But if he had a series where he was relatively consistent, let's say it's a 7-game series and he only, has 2 bad games in there and, 5 really good ones, then it's possible that they get some sort of upset against even a team like the Utah Jazz. Maybe. Still not betting on that at all, but maybe. But Dillon is definitely a factor in that regard. Then I'm going to quickly talk about the play-in teams right now, which are the Golden State Warriors and San Antonio Spurs. For the Warriors, I have to go Kelly Oubre Jr. Now, I feel like a lot of people would be like, wouldn't it be Andrew Wiggins? But Andrew has actually been pretty fucking consistent for the Warriors this year, so I actually can't really pick him. A guy who's not been consistent is Kelly Oubre, who has been shooting poorly on layups this year, who has been shooting poorly from 3. He'll have good games where he puts up lots of points, but he consistently just is a brick house, and to the point where he's not even starting anymore, lately anyways. So he needs to be better for them to have a chance against some teams, because Steph's going to be good. I'm confident Wiggins is going to bring the defense and be a relatively efficient 17 a game. Kelly Oubre is where the inconsistency lies most with the Warriors on top of their full bench unit, but your X factor can't be just an entire bench. So Kelly Oubre for the Warriors. And then finally for the San Antonio Spurs, it is Derek White. Now, I say this guy's an X factor, but I'm pretty confident he's going to be great in the playoffs. The reason he is an X factor is that in the regular season, he's extremely inconsistent, but in the playoffs the last 2-3 years, he has been really good when he plays. In one series against Denver in particular, I think he averaged over 20 points per game because he was just fantastic in that series for the Spurs. He turns it up to a new level when he gets to the playoffs. So if the Spurs do get in the playoffs, expect to hear the name Derek White quite a bit. But that was my X factors for the West. The Eastern Conference X factor should be out relatively soon. And I do want to add a quick message about the channel at the end of this video for those of you who may care. Lately, there has not been a deep dive, and that is because I have been completely burnt out in the creativity and motivation department lately. It just simply does not exist, and I do not want to force out a deep dive like through that and it not be very good. The last deep dive I kind of wanted to be better, but I put it out anyways, and I don't want to do that again, and I don't want to compromise the quality of that series just for the sake of uploading it consistently. And just for me, I need a little bit of a break from shit like that. So just not doing the deep dive series for a bit and then getting back into it when I have that creative spark, I think is the best thing for the series and certainly the best thing for me. So sorry there hasn't been any deep dives. I really enjoy putting those out, but if I can't put them out the way I want to put them out, then I'm not going to put them out. So that's that. The new podcast, again, that's going to be out. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, but at the end of this video, please be sure to like and subscribe for NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.